Hello and welcome to What the Tech from Boast AI, where we talk with some of the brilliant minds behind new and exciting tech initiatives to learn what it takes to tackle technological uncertainty and eventually change the world. Today I am happy to welcome to the show Kristjan Sigurdson, Managing Director at Endeavor Canada. Founded in 1997, Endeavor is a global organization with a mission to unlock the transformational power of entrepreneurship by selecting, supporting, and investing in the world's top founders. Today, Endeavor's network spans 40-plus locations and supports 2,300-plus entrepreneurs, whose companies generate combined revenues of over $28 billion, have created more than 3.9 million jobs, and in 2020, raised over $4 billion in capital. As Managing Director of Endeavor Canada, Kristjen connects growth stage entrepreneurs with resources, mentorship, and networks to scale their businesses and transform their communities. But he's been working hard to drive Canadian innovation in numerous roles for more than a decade, including helping scale the Creative Destruction Lab into one of the world's largest startup support organizations, while also completing a PhD in strategic management from the University of Toronto's Rotman School of Management. He's got an amazing background and has been a stellar resource to founders across Canada and beyond. And I can't wait to pick his brain on what it takes to drive innovation, achieve growth, and scale in 2024. So without further ado, welcome to the show, Kristjan.
Thanks so much for having me, Paul. Really excited to be here.
Absolutely. It is my pleasure. I know I gave a little bit of your background, but I'd love to hear from you. How did you get into the startup space, the entrepreneurship space, and just what got you into the tech scene too, to begin with?
Yeah, it's a great question, and at risk of being long-winded, it's a bit of a long story. I'll try to be brief. Really, my kind of career in startups traces back to the late 2000s. I was working in international development at an organization based in Washington, D.C. And our focus was helping less advanced economies, primarily in Latin America, to bolster their economies by improving the quality of their research universities. And what I kind of came to realize back then was just this critical role that university research and the intellectual property generated there had on economic development. And it was an interesting problem because you saw universities like Stanford that were able to, through two graduate students, produce a company like Google. And that just simply didn't happen at a lot of other universities. This led me to come back to Canada, where I, became a bit obsessed with understanding the secret formula that these powerhouse U.S. schools seem to have in turning research into billion-dollar companies. And it led me to actually pursue a research-focused master's degree at the University of Toronto, and eventually my PhD. And I think kind of a key turning point for me that got me specifically into Canadian startups and tech transfer was that I spent back in 2012 a summer at the University of Toronto's archives going through over 200 boxes of invention disclosures between 1980 and 2005, where very few of these had been successful, despite the quality of the research that these inventions were based on being really high. So I went through these boxes trying to figure out what is this formula, what is going wrong. And in the process, I kind of became obsessed with this challenge of like, this isn't just a less developed economy issue. This is an issue that most economies, most regions seem to face, with a few exceptions being the MITs and the Stanfords and so on. And at around the same time, I was introduced to the person that eventually became my supervisor of my PhD, Professor Ajay Agrawal, who was at that time founding and building the first year the Creative Destruction Lab. And so my passion for understanding the problem of turning great IP and technology into great companies was sort of wed with a program that was exactly trying to solve that challenge by supporting these early stage entrepreneurs, specifically with a science background in creating companies. And that led to about a decade of graduate research, coupled with a variety of leadership roles at CDL, as we took that organization from a small upstart sort of pseudo accelerator in Toronto to a global organization that expanded to 12 or 13 different universities around the world and across Canada. So that's kind of the long history. And then about a year and a half ago, after spending that long with CDL, I decided to move on and was approached by some of the board members of Endeavor Canada, who were trying to focus on a later stage than what CDL was focused on growth stage companies. And I truly came to believe and had come to understand by that point that was still a really big shortcoming of our ecosystem here, was figuring out ways, and it's hard to do this, figuring out ways to support the companies that are kind of beyond where all of the typical accelerators and incubators support them. So that's been my mission for the last 13 months since joining Endeavor Canada, and it's been a kind of a great journey over the last decade to get here.
That is really interesting, Christian. I have several different questions I want to pull up. First on, I'd love to know a little bit, if you can share without giving away the secret sauce. What were some of your findings when you were deep in those archives and you were finding all this IP that had just never been necessarily taken to market or taken to the startup world or brought to the business table compared to, like you had said, the Stanford and the MITs of the world? What was some of the missing ingredients there that left these languishing when they were great innovations and great ideas, but they didn't necessarily have all the tools, perhaps, or resources to get those into the company stage, to get those into the startup world?
Yeah, there's a couple things, and in the kind of the great failure of that master's thesis, and you can go find it and read it, and it doesn't give a silver bullet solution. Sadly, I wish it did. That's what I hoped. I hoped I would uncover something, truly pithy and transformative, but brief. The reality is these projects failed for a myriad reason, a set of reasons. I think, if I was to boil down some kind of key talking points about what I learned from that was that every one of these projects was so distinct, and that I think that's true of every startup company that's scaling. Like there are commonalities, but the set of resources and talent in the founding team, the industry, the competitive landscape, the easily accessible markets are always different, and so there's no like you can learn some things from a book or from a set of lessons or from the findings of a research paper on entrepreneurship or entrepreneurial strategy. And certainly I've worked with some incredible minds at the Rotman School and elsewhere that have tried to boil these things down. But when it came to kind of identifying the failure points, it seemed to be that there was just an infinite number of them. And I think one thing that did become clear though was that the schools like Stanford and MIT had found a way to fund in a way that I think Canadian schools, the University of Toronto among them, at least back, in the period that I was studying, had found a way to fund exceptionally talented people to support these entrepreneurs with very large budgets. Like the Stanford Tech Transfer Office's endowment fund was on the same scale as all of the University of Toronto's endowment fund. And so they had incredible world-class lawyers. They had local mentors who built billion-dollar companies that they could bring in and mentor the Larry Pages and the Sergey Brins. And it was just about supporting them with really, really bright people with exceptional experience who could figure out, okay, what is the specific failure point with this company and how do we help push those founders past it? And I think in other ecosystems, you just don't have that luxury. You don't have that density of talent and experience and judgment. And often, and again, this has maybe changed to some extent over the last couple of decades, but often there wasn't really an appreciation from the university administrators and leadership at that time, or from the inventors slash founders themselves, of just how important that elite expertise was in getting them over the line. And one thing is like raising a seed round or licensing your invention to a company. The other part is maximizing the value or the potential you actually build a giant company based on that. I think there's a lot of too early celebration of these early wins, and we need to celebrate wins. Every part of the entrepreneurial journey is hard, but if we raise a seed round and believe, well, our job is done, we're now in the successful group of projects. What I've learned over the years is that's just the start line of the race. And I think expertise at the later stages of the race, the last 3 quarters on your way to a very large liquidity event, is sometimes where our companies in Canada and really a lot of parts of the world seem to trip up and fall.
Absolutely. That makes perfect sense. I'm based here in Boston, so I think there's also blinders on some of the people in the local tech hubs, at least here in the States. We seem to think because we have Harvard, we have MIT, we have everything we need here, and this is the only place where innovation is happening. I have learned since working with Boast, and I think this might have been a change even in the past 5 to 10 years. I've only been with Boast for about a year and a half now, but going to events in Toronto, going to Startup Fest in Montreal, going to Innovate West out in Vancouver a few weeks back, I had no idea how much of the innovation ecosystem that existed outside of my local tech community until I came to Boast. And a lot of it is in areas that we're not even touching here in the Boston area. We're very, very focused on a few specific things here. We think that we do it all, but we absolutely don't. The quantum computing up in Toronto, everything coming out of Waterloo, those are just a couple of examples. I feel like a lot of the basis for AI too, at least as we talk about it today, came out of those think tanks in Toronto and in that area in Ontario. So it's been eye-opening to me, and I definitely can relate to what you're saying in terms of just the resources being more readily available in those areas where you associate innovation naturally with it. Whereas there are opportunities both in academia and outside of it for entrepreneurs in Canada and anywhere to tap into resources and to make their ideas come to life. I don't know if that's something that's changed in the recent past. Again, I'm kind of new to seeing what the tech ecosystem and startup ecosystem is up in Canada, but it's so supportive. And again, it's just a different flavor. I feel like there's a barrier to entry in the US and at those institutions, and you need to be in the Harvard or MIT or Stanford ecosystem to leverage those resources and go to that big scale. But I do love also that at Endeavor, you're not just focused on getting those little ideas off the ground. You're looking more at those growth stage companies. So I'd like to know a little bit more about what's different with the work you're doing at Endeavor versus what you did at CDL. And yeah, just talk to me a little bit about that and just the realities for those growth stage companies in Canada today who maybe didn't have access to all those resources that some of the companies in the US that are those unicorn success stories had from the start.
Yeah, I mean that you know the difference between where I was focused at Creative Destruction Lab and where I'm focused now really is related to just the stage of the company. And there's a lot of seed stage and series stage businesses and a lot of support programs and initiatives and networks for those stages of companies in Canada and really around the world. There's much less available for, when you get to that, very thin air at the 20 million in revenue plus range. And I think there's almost like a misunderstanding in the general public, certainly in a lot of policymakers and so on, and even in some people that are even in the startup community itself, that once you get to that stage, you've made it and you're fine. But you look at these companies and they struggle with profitability and they have diluted themselves by trying to raise capital to get to that stage. They are extremely lonely and kind of on an island. There's very few people that understand what it's like to have to, and I think at the risk of people saying I'm playing the world's tiniest violin here, it's having to let go 30% of your staff to keep the company alive and being solely responsible for that decision as the CEO and founder. When 3 years ago you were raising seed rounds, you had a 3-person team, or 4 or 5 years ago you were doing this. The difference in the level of weight on your shoulders at that stage is enormous, and there's not a lot of support networks. There's other large companies in your ecosystem typically, but they haven't grown at that rate. They're more sort of legacy businesses. They don't grow and expand and take aggressive risks like startups have to because of the way that they're backed through venture capital and the way that they grow very rapidly to try and take on a market that could be closed to them internationally if they don't capture it quickly. Really what Endeavor tries to do, and I think what we're the best in the world at, is creating a peer-to-peer network for growth stage founders, for companies that are, have product market fit, are aggressively trying to expand internationally, and are often founded by founders who are doing this for the first time or maybe the second time, that are in this spot where every challenge they face on a daily or hourly basis, every key decision they make, they don't have a repertoire of having done that previously to pull on. And so I think we do an exceptional job of convening people from around the world who have built these substantial businesses. The benefit for Endeavor Canada, which was only launched a few years ago in the pandemic in 2021, is Endeavor's been around, as you said, for about 27 years now. We have an incredible global network of growth stage founders. I think last year there were something like 76 tech unicorn companies that were being run by Endeavor entrepreneurs around the world. And so, we like to think of it as it's so hard to succeed at that later stage and it takes, a mix of skill, support network, luck, extreme ambition and persistence. There's maybe at any given moment 10,000 people on Earth who are capable of getting to $1 billion plus valuation with a venture-backed company, and we're proud and humbled to have what we think is probably about 10 or 20% of them as Endeavor entrepreneurs in the network. And for a Canadian founder, or for a founder in many of our U.S. offices, I know that you operate and you're in Boston. We have offices in Detroit and Miami and Atlanta and Colorado and elsewhere in the US and around the world, for those founders to be able to tap into that global network, to reach outside of their ecosystem for the type of support and shoulders to lean on, and also to give back to those founders and teach them what we've learned here in Canada or the US. I think it's a really exceptional opportunity. And my job is to just make those connections to create and nurture the types of events that will bring those people together, and to create sort of a platform for serendipity as well, where these founders can meet one another and find value in ways they weren't even expecting to, just based on the quality of the people they're putting themselves in rooms with.
I love that. Title of episode, Platform for Serendipity. That was beautifully put, Kristjen.
I have to admit, I stole that from an incredible entrepreneur that I spent a bunch of time with this week, who named LP Maurice, who's with a
LP
company
Maurice.
based in Montreal called BusBud. It's probably the global leader in bus ticketing for intercity travel, just an exceptional Canadian company. And I was reading a blog that he posted years ago, talking about different initiatives in the Montreal ecosystem, and he used the term serendipity platforms. And I think that succinctly describes a lot of what we try to do at Endeavor.
That's beautiful. First off, I am a victim of the Boston transit system. So if they could come down here and help us out with our buses, not having a way to fill up my Charlie card at a bus station is a problem I have constantly. I won't digress there, but LP Maurice, Bus
He's
Bud, come
only
to
able to
Boston.
help you with intercity bus travel, though. He's not trying to take on city transit. He's trying to take on that challenge of getting from Buenos Aires to Montevideo and things like that.
Oh, that's amazing. Okay, well, all right. That's a whole nother podcast. I will reach out to LP to get him on here. But again, Platform for Serendipity, though, I think that really speaks to, like you had said, the peer-to-peer nature of what you guys do, and what I think is such a huge differentiator, at least in terms of the different programs that we've had on our podcast. You had mentioned before, CDL is more akin to like that incubator or accelerator for those more early stage founders who are getting into it, whereas it's lonely at that growth phase, like you had said. And I think there's such a benefit to having those people who you're bumping elbows with, who can actually share in that with you, because it's not a perspective we often get. I think a lot of folks who we'll talk to on this show and just in doing business with those customers, it's always almost looking up, because it's always about, we need that funding from an investor, or we need to get some VC, or we need to hand over some equity, or in Bo's case, we need somebody who can help us tap into non-dilutive funding to your point, not hand over that equity so early and then get even more lonely and feel almost handcuffed to a business that you were very passionate about when you started. But now you're just keeping the lights on because you might have moved far away from what your original goals or mission were, but because you handed over so much equity early, you don't really have that much control anymore. But that's a whole separate digression. But I love to hear that you provide that resource, because again, it's very much an ethos that we share here at Boast. We have been around since 2011, but we very much embrace the startup mentality. Again, we only succeed if our clients and partners succeed. So we are bumping elbows with them. That's very much how we feel. We are peers with our partners and with our customers. So just a little bit of simpatico between what we do here at Boast and the global network that you have over at Endeavor. I know no one wants to pick their favorite child, but are there any success stories out of Endeavor since you've joined that you want to maybe highlight or shine a light on?
So we're new in Canada. As I said, there's many success stories globally of Endeavor over the 30 or so years that it's been operating. In Canada, we're still in the startup phase ourselves. We're a small team, working really hard to support a small group of exceptional growth stage founders that we've selected to date. There are 4 Endeavor Canada companies presently, one in Victoria called Certain, one in Calgary called Cement, one that's split between Toronto and Vancouver, Coho, which is a neobank, and then another company, SRTX Labs, based in Montreal. And again, these are all companies with just exceptional founders doing incredible things. I think they've raised a combined almost 700 million US in capital. They generate a few hundred million US in annual revenue and employ about 1,000 people across them. So these are, I think, some of Canada's best shots on goal at creating a truly economy transforming company. And our job is to do absolutely everything in our power to support the founders and the leadership of those companies to help them get there, because the finish line is not directly in front of them. It's a ways to go.
Yeah.
But each of those companies are just exceptional. Endeavor operates a fairly rigorous selection process. It takes a while to get through. We have a national stage and then an international stage where world-class entrepreneurs and investors from around the world assemble to decide who gets in and who becomes the next Endeavor entrepreneur class. And so all of these founders have sort of made it through that gauntlet. We're super proud of them, and also just humbled that they choose to give us their time. And then there's a whole other class of great companies that we have in the pipeline that we're really excited to get to work for after they're selected.
That is so cool. And I love that I recognize some of those names. I think Cement specifically, that is one that I know we have some friendlies in common with the folks over on that team.
I'm
So
sure.
happy to hear it. And again, like Boast, we're very much made up of founders from the tech ecosystem across Canada too. Our founder Lloyd, of course, and Alex, they both did their own hustling to get Boast off the ground, but we got DNA from the Diligent and Galvanized team here, and we're trying to be a unicorn in our own right eventually at some point. And we want to, again, make sure that we're working with peers and that we're bringing everybody with us. That all boats are rising with the tide that we're hoping that we can help get higher. So I'd love to know what's in store for you for the rest of the year. Anything on the short term or long term that you want to highlight, or any new exciting initiatives that you have going on at Endeavor that we can maybe shout out?
I mean, there's a lot going on in Endeavor at all times. I myself and my team will be, traveling around the country, helping our entrepreneurs finding the next generation of founders that we can support. So a decent amount of travel across the country. And then there's Endeavor events happening all around the world at any given time. You've got offices in 43 different countries. So we'll be supporting our entrepreneurs and our board members who play a critical role in the operation and the mentoring of the companies that are involved in Endeavor and just getting them to events and really putting to use their expertise. So that kind of sums up the rest of the year. It's going to be a busy year. Like I said, we're still in the startup phase, so we've got ambitious goals to really take advantage of the global network for Canadian entrepreneurs and also start helping Canadian entrepreneurs give their own, pay it forward resources into the next generation of founders from around the world that are involved in our other offices.
Fantastic. Well, I hope that we can cross paths in person. Truly, that would be fantastic. And again, it sounds like you have your dance card full for the next few months, but exciting stuff happening at Endeavor. Any sage wisdom for the founders in our audience about how they can navigate the market conditions today, or even just capture success in 2024 as a Canadian, US, or international startup founder business endeavor?
I mean, again, I don't even presume to be able to provide the kind of advice. It's like this is a thing that this is like my inner academic coming through. It's like as you dive deeper into a topic, like how do you become a successful entrepreneur, you realize that you couldn't possibly provide a silver bullet solution to that. What I'll say is I will leave with one thing. I think, one of the things that we talk about at Endeavor is this concept of the multiplier effect. Now, the importance of having very large successful companies exist in your ecosystem and then in having them apply what they've learned, the capital that they've acquired through that success to the next generation. We saw during my CDL years the impact that Shopify's IPO had on the ecosystem in Toronto and around the country. And I think it's easy to focus on like, oh, that, to kind of write that off as, oh, it's just a bunch of, tech folks that get rich. These events, are defining for your ecosystem. I mean, the reason that a place like Seattle is the way it is and is as, prosperous and successful is because of all of these, leaders in Amazon and Microsoft who rode that wave, who pushed those companies to the heights they achieved, and then who went back into the ecosystem, founded their own companies, joined the boards of new companies, invested their hard-earned, capital into the next generation. And that's really what we're trying to create and create kind of a virtuous cycle of in Canada. But it takes getting these companies to the finish line. We need more massive exits and liquidity events in this country. And I think that's just a critical thing for the general public, for founders, for policymakers to keep their minds on is how important creating those and creating the conditions that make that possible are for the future of the country. So, that's what we're about at Endeavor is generating a multiplier effect. And we're a platform not just to help the entrepreneurs get there, but also to help them give back and multiply their impact by nurturing the next generation, investing in their companies, and so on. So if anyone out there is interested in learning more, my door is always open. You can find my contact in LinkedIn. My email is there. It's easy to get in touch with me. I'd love to talk with you.
Absolutely. And one more thought before we go, just because I'm so glad you brought up the Shopify of it all. When I was at my first Startup Fest in Montreal last year, we went to the Founder Fuel demo day. They're a partner of ours. We work with a lot of the 2023 cohort today. I met a lot of them in person last time. It was fantastic. Special guest Harvey from Shopify came on the stage. It was like a homecoming. I, again, learned so much more from just being on the floor at that event about what's happening in Canada and the opportunity. And to your point about kind of giving back to the ecosystem, he was such a cheerleader of every one of the early stage startups who was there. He knew what they were doing and he was ready to advocate for them. And he was working with Katie and Lisa and the Founder Fuel team to make sure that the resources he had would be available to these folks in the room as well. And he made himself so approachable too. I just can't emphasize enough that that's a perfect example of, again, let's get everybody lifted. We need more of those big exits. We need more of those big unicorns coming into market. And I'm glad that Endeavor is helping make that happen. Glad that we're both at the GOAT growth stage here at Boast and at Endeavor. And I can't thank you enough for chatting with me today, Kristjen. This is exciting. And I hope to see you again on your roadshow this summer.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure and hope to see you soon. Thanks so much, Paul.
Awesome.